Well, hello there, woman beings. We are so excited to be here with you today. We have the amazing guest, Miss Ashley, who happens to be a licensed marriage and family therapist. So we're excited to talk all things with her today. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Welcome to the Woman Being Podcast community,
where we explore thoughts and opinions
and have the freedom to change our minds
without expectation or judgment.
We will hold a safe space and support each other
as we navigate together in the form of feminine.
I'm so excited to talk about this topic today. Mental health is a big deal in the current social, political climate. 2020 has not been a smooth one. But I'd love to start out with, what made you get into therapy? Like, what made you choose that path?
You know, that's been a journey. I'm going to be honest. I like to surmise it with it chose me, right? And I'll get into a little bit of that history, but from a very young age, I talked about being a child psychologist. Don't know where that came from. Don't know why I can't. I mean, I'm talking like 5 or 6 years old. Like, wow. I want to grow up to be a child psychologist. I don't even know any child psychologists. Exactly.
Yeah.
But there was something, a little bit of backstory. I am an existential therapist. I'm an existential person, to be very honest. The meaning of life, the purpose of life, things like that, very important to me. So I like to joke, probably a little self-deprecating, but I was that weird kid on the playground where everybody else was like swinging and having fun, and I'm over here trying to talk to the adults like, what happens to us after we die? Like, where do we go, right? Heavy stuff. So it didn't surprise anybody that I grew up to become a therapist, especially when I was talking about being a child psychologist. But yeah, it kind of just naturally chose me. I didn't pursue it right after school. I actually didn't pursue college at all right after high school. Took some time off for myself, made some other very big life choices, and went a completely different direction. Decided at 25 that it was time to come back to school and college because I knew that's where my heart was. Went to the Aspire program at Simpson here in town. Very grateful for the educational experience I got there. Had no desire to do anything further than that, but also got to thinking, what am I going to do with a degree in psychology? Just kind of opened my mind to, graduate school and, okay, maybe I'll pursue this. Again, the universe kind of pulled me in directions and boom, ended up at University of San Francisco with a master's degree in counseling psychology, and pretty much your course of action from there is becoming a therapist. So that's the short version, but really I liken it to the universe. Like, I think I got pulled in that direction way more than I chose it intentionally.
Wow. I love that so much. I mean, it feels like at some level there always is kind of a path that we get privileged to walk on for each of us. And so grateful for people like you, especially right now. I mean, I can attest for myself, therapy has actually changed my life, and I'm so grateful to have worked with the individual I've been with for, 3 years now. And it makes me wonder, like, so we're in a pandemic right now. How has that affected the way that people are approaching mental health? Because it feels like that kind of revolves around a lot of conversation right now. Yeah. And then follow up to that, like, what are some things that people should be looking out for in order to take care of themselves right now in this current climate?
Well, I'm going to start with the first part of the question for sure. You know, this year, I make a lot of bad jokes. Hope you ladies have the patience for me. I got a good sense of humor. But, I like to joke a lot that I have job security. Us humans, we have a difficult thing that we're moving through in the human condition, and 2020 is not really doing us any favors. This pandemic, mental health wise, you guys are exactly right. It's extremely challenging, to say the least. So I saw a meme on social media not too long ago, actually probably in April, but I'm not sure if it's been a few months, a couple months, a whole year. I'm not really sure what's happening, right? But I saw a meme on social media that said, welcome to 2020. If you didn't have an anxiety disorder before, one has now been assigned to you. Right? Because none of us know what we're doing. None of us know how to figure it out. So I would say for sure mental health is even more of a struggle amidst this pandemic than it has been in the past. Even those of us, I'm a professional. I have the fancy letters after my name. I talk about anxiety all day long, and I'm challenged this year to practice what I preach when it comes to coping strategies because it's hard. So coming back around to, you know, what are we doing about it? How is it affecting people? What does it look like? I'm seeing a lot more people reaching out for therapy, which I think is incredibly valuable. I'll talk about the limitations of that here in a little bit, though, because it's hard. But I am seeing a lot more people that are open to communicating about how hard this is on their mental health. In the past, there's a lot of stigma around therapy. There's a lot of stigma around counseling. And the benefit, it's hard to call it a benefit, but I feel like this year has opened people up to like, okay, maybe we're not as tough as we thought we were mentally and emotionally. Maybe we could use that support.
Yeah.
But I mean, to get into the coping strategies of how to survive this right now, it's all about self-care. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Self-care, I feel like, is thrown around a lot. And it swings from the pendulum of like, treat yourself and go buy pointless merchandise to like, you know, valid you know, prayer, exercise, meditation, you know, things like that. So what do you mean when you say mental care?
Yeah, I love that question. Yeah, I hear you. I love that question because I think I have a little bit of a unique perspective on it. Self-care, I think on the obvious level, is the pleasurable activities, right? It's the little indulgences here and there. It's, you know, for me, bubble baths, pedicures, like just, you know, little tiny moments of being able to recharge my batteries. However, that's not the only self-care. Self-care is also boundaries. It's telling people no when you need to say no, right? Not biting off more than you can chew as a person, which I think is probably one of the harder things this year, is knowing what your limitations are. Like, okay, I don't have the mental energy or the emotional energy to be with this type of person right now, or to obligate myself to things, even though last year I would have done it in a heartbeat. Not my year this year, right? Not going to be able to pursue those activities or do those things. So sometimes self-care is saying no. Sometimes it's upholding boundaries. My colleagues don't always love this idea of mine, I'm going to be honest. But sometimes self-care is being able to, from my perspective, check something off the list, right?
Yes, that speaks to me on a personal level.
I love that. Well, we're reluctant to say that, right? We want self-care to be all the positive stuff. But I know for me, if I've got something on my mind that I just keep thinking about, like I got to fold that laundry, I got to do that task that I'm avoiding that I don't want to get done, right? Of course, I don't at the outset think of that as self-care. But the minute that's checked off the list, I'm like, oh,
yes.
I feel so much better, right? So sometimes that's the challenge of self-care and that's why I love that question, because sometimes it's about just doing whatever you have to do to help yourself feel a little bit of relief at the end of the day, even if it's not what you want to do.
Yeah. I feel like the when you have like so many tasks that are looming over you, like that has a mental toll on you that you don't even realize. I think like when you're like, okay, well, I need to do this, but like if you're able to actually like cross those things off, you are like sort of mentally unloading things. And I think too, like you were talking about how with the pandemic so many people have sort of realized, oh, I'm not as together as I thought I was. And like I think some of this is a very sort of Christian concept that like when you go through trials, that reveals actually how you're doing, right? Like that reveals how well you actually are doing, because you don't have all of the distractions and all of these great things that are filling up your life and not really making you self-evaluate and not making you actually sit down with your thoughts, actually sit down with yourself and be like, okay, well, how am I actually doing? So something like this pandemic, especially with people having to quarantine, not being able to do as many things as you maybe used to do, you get to sit with yourself and be like, okay, do I even like myself? Am I happy with myself? Do I have like my house in order? Because I've kind of just been carrying my house around and doing things, but not actually cleaning it up, you know?
Yeah. Well, even last night, I've had an interesting week. And last night, I had something scheduled that I canceled. And then I went instead and like went to the store and I bought some stuff that was much needed. Even like honestly, the only thing I wanted to do last night was lay down and like shut out the world. But I forced myself to get up and get the stuff that I needed. I came home. I like turned on some new music. I just found a new artist that I love and put away laundry and like washed my face and like cleaned up my room a little bit, and I felt so good after that. Even like, but at the initial, if I would have done what I wanted to do, I would have just laid around on the couch and like not talked to anybody,
and just stayed in that like self
like
pity
the
sort of
cocoon
like
of
just
sadness.
sad.
It has its benefits,
It does,
right?
it
I mean,
does.
again, there is a self-care element to that. You know, I don't always believe we should be challenging ourselves, but I think to a degree, and again, my job security is humans need a little bit of push and challenge, and I think some of that is self-care oriented. Like it's appropriate. We need it, right? And that is my job security too, is we're not, I mean, like kind of going to what you were saying, I mean, we're not great at naturally looking at our stuff, right? Sometimes we need that professional guidance and support and kind of love wrapped around us to look at our households and see what we got going on the inside, because we're just not as inclined to challenge ourselves. But when we do, it's worth it.
Yeah. Well, and there are some times where I'm having a bad day and I get home and I have a glass of wine and I do nothing and I feel great at the end of it. And there are some times when I do that and I feel like worse, you know? So it's kind of like you have to read yourself a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I just found it like, I was like, I just did a bunch of chores and I feel so good. And it was kind of surprising to me. But I'm also wondering, moving away from self-care, well, I mean, this is still self-care, but there's actually a very heavy climate right now when it comes to mental health, and that with the emergence of this pandemic and all of the things that are happening, the suicide rate has gone up a lot, like at alarming rates. And so I was just curious, like, why is that? What do you see the pandemic influencing that, and like what can we do?
Yeah. It's a heavy one, right? That's a heavy one, and it's a very loaded one. I think with that, like my joke about the anxiety meme, with anxiety, you know, it's on the same spectrum for me, so to speak. It's like the opposite end of the spectrum as depression. And suicidality and thinking about that is an inherent part of a person becoming depressed. In my opinion, almost all humans at different points in their life have dark thoughts. Doesn't mean they're suicidal, doesn't mean they're going to act on it, but, you know, thinking about our own death, thinking about what it would be like to not exist anymore or not have to go through the suffering that, again, is just inherent to the human condition, is a very real part of depression. I think right now, coping, again, has become so stretched and so limited that people are struggling more with depression than they have in the past, and it's a challenge to find a coping strategy that works. I also think we're social creatures. Like, we need each other. And probably, you know, in the last couple of generations, we've really lost touch with our connections with others. I think it's a very interesting time because we have a lot of technology and resources that could help us come together more, even amidst social isolation and self-isolation and self-quarantine. But we're not really using them. We're struggling. It's really hard right now to think creatively, you know? One of the things I talk about in therapy a lot is, you know, logic versus emotion. If you think about a toddler in a tantrum, which I've got toddlers, so I know all about toddlers and tantrums, but can you rationalize with a toddler in the middle of a tantrum? Right? Can you sit and talk to them and have a logical conversation? No, this is why you can't have that thing that you want. No, right? You got to wait for them to de-escalate and come out of it. Then you can usually, you know, have a kid-appropriate conversation and talk a toddler through a situation. Us adults in the middle of emotion, whether that be anxiety or depression, we are essentially toddlers in tantrums, right? So we are basically overwhelmed with emotion, the same as kiddos can be, and we don't know what to do with it, right? So when we're highly anxious or highly depressed, we're going through that same experience. Sitting there and explaining, okay, this is what you do when you're this emotional. This is how you get through it. This is how you keep yourself safe. Really hard to do, just like trying to rationalize with a toddler in a tantrum. So people are struggling right now, and they're not really in their most logical way of being, and it's hard to give them coping strategies and have them go, okay, yeah, that makes sense, right? So basically, I mean, we're overwhelmed, and I think that's where, you know, we're seeing things like the suicide rates go up. It's hard. I think we really need to get creative in terms of how to support one another socially, even through technology, because of self-isolation and self-quarantine. One more kind of tangent. I'm going to segue a little bit on that, which I think is something that's very near and dear to my heart lately when it comes to kind of this depression and talk of suicide rates, is toxic positivity. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the term toxic positivity.
I think I know where you're going. I've never heard of it.
Well, I'm a believer. I feel like I'm going to go on a whole spiel about this, but I love it.
We're ready for it.
I'm hooked.
I'm a believer in neutrality and being objective. I really, I've studied a lot of Eastern philosophy. I attribute a lot of Eastern philosophy to my own personal life as well as my practice. And I believe in trying to find middle ground and being objective and being pretty neutral about things. I am not a clinician that's out there promoting a lot of positive psychology. I'm not running around in a self-love, let's all feel extremely great about things, because I think that sets us up for some disappointment. And I think toxic positivity has come in. We're trying so hard right now to be hopeful that we're going to get through this pandemic and we're going to get through it okay. We're trying to push, it's all going to be fine. We've got the tools, we've got the resources. Partially true. But I think sometimes when we come in with too much positivity and too much it's going to be fine, we're going to be fine, we're kind of inadvertently invalidating how hard this is and how much this really sucks, quite frankly. And if we invalidate that, we never look at that, we never get to kind of find a comfort within that. And the disappointment when it really sinks in that, no, this isn't okay. We are suffering right now. This does suck. That disappointment of our expectations that it would get better in a certain way honestly hurts us worse, in my opinion. I don't know if that makes sense, if I'm saying that
it
the way
does
I want
make
to.
sense. I actually a similar concept that I have been really interested in lately is the idea of body neutrality. So there's body positivity as a movement and a concept, but I've seen a lot more people going towards body neutrality now in saying hey, yes, you should not be hating your body, but this is just a body. And that's what it is. You don't need to make a judgment towards it. You don't need to say whether it's good or bad. This is the vessel that holds you. And I actually was reading an article the other day about the singer Billie Eilish. She often wears super, super baggy clothes when she's on stage and when she's performing and everything. And she talks about how it's because if she covers up her body, then no one can make a judgment on it. And people still make judgments about her body, even though they never see it. And there was a paparazzi shot that came out where she was wearing a more form-fitting tank top and bike shorts, I think. And everyone went crazy on it, talking about this 18-year-old girl and how oh, look at the curves she has. She looks like she's a 30-year-old woman. People making all these different judgments about her body. And then a lot of people in the sort of body positivity vein were saying things well, she's so brave, to be bearing her body like this, to have not the typical skinny body. But the article I was reading was saying, actually, this isn't brave. This is just her living her life. It should not be brave to have a certain body type because it's just a body. There is not any sort of courage involved in that. She is literally just living. And it shouldn't have to be considered brave to live in the body that you've been given, And so I think that comes along in that same sort of concept of there is not a judgment on this. There is space for you to be happy and enjoy the good things and be hopeful, and there's also space to recognize the weight and the heaviness of things, because like you said, if you don't recognize those things, then you're kind of living in an alternate reality. You're in a fantasy world at that point of saying oh, everything's gonna be fine, it's gonna be fine, and when things aren't fine, you're crushed.
Yeah.
And that goes back to the depression, and I think exactly all of those things, Emma. I think it goes back to why we're seeing so much decline right now, because not only are mental health resources scarce, truly, for what we need, but on top of that, we almost are more disappointed by our expectations, lends to the depression, lends to the suicide rates and everything else. Yeah.
No, I was going to say,
see those wheels turning.
I have a hard question to ask, and I think it feels like everyone's wondering, but we don't really know how to answer it or what the right thing is to do. But in some ways, it feels like we are sacrificing the mental health of many people and for the sake of keeping virus rates low. What do you think about that?
It is a hard question. It's a hard thing to answer. The uniqueness of my position as a clinician right now is that I am a licensed marriage family therapist. My immediate response is to look out for mental health, right, and to help protect people. And honestly, it's within the ethics of my profession to keep people safe from things like depression and suicidality. However, I work in the medical field as well, right? And the medical field right now, I mean, we are the fighters for keeping this pandemic at bay. We are the fighters for protecting people, masking, the whole 9 yards, social isolation. So I feel sometimes like I'm kind of right in the middle of that question in terms of, what is the right thing to do? I'm very biased in this question too, because I have kiddos, like I've mentioned before, and I'm looking at them and their social experiences, right? Because they're the next generation coming forth, and they're not really getting a healthy, well-rounded social experience right now. And I definitely think that's lending to, I'm watching, I don't want to say decline in my own kids' mental health, but they're struggling in ways they never have before. And those are my kids. Like, I can only imagine what's happening worldwide, socially
kids
right
who
now.
don't have the privilege of having a therapist for
I
a
don't know.
parent.
Don't ask them if it's a privilege or not. I don't know. Give them 10 years. They might disagree with that. But yeah, so I think, I'm constantly looking at that question, Kelly, in terms of, at what cost? At what cost? Because, I think we're, again, the core of what I believe is we're social creatures. And I think we need each other. I already think we were struggling with that before this pandemic. I think the pandemic and the need to distance really brought to light how much we need each other, but also how little we were prioritizing our social relationships, our family relationships and whatnot before. Another joke I like to make as a therapist, my technical letters, the fancy letters after my name, are LMFT, Licensed Marriage Family Therapist. Nowhere in there am I an individual so-and-so Bob or Sally therapist, right? I work in the scope of, in the context of families and relationships. We need those, right? So the fact that we are challenged right now to get as much distance physically, especially as possible, I think I think it's necessary to help with the pandemic, to do our due diligence. But I think, again, we really need to get creative in terms of, okay, then how do we get those relationship needs met?
Yeah. Well, especially with the holidays approaching and different guidelines coming out, like, this is a time when, like, families connect and come together. I mean, not for everybody, but it really, and so I know a lot of people are struggling with the idea that, like, I can't see my grandparents this Thanksgiving, and I can't, like, hug my aunt and, see my nieces and nephews. And that's, like, that's really hard.
Yeah. Well,
it's really hard.
And I want to mention, too, on that note, this is, I think it's just good for everyone to hear and have a reminder outside of, we talk about it a lot in the mental health field, but I think it should be common knowledge. The holidays are notoriously the hardest time of year anyways for mental health. It's my busy season. Again, horrible joke, but it really is. And then we're coming into this in completely different life circumstance than we've ever had before. You get a lot more suicide, you get a lot more depression, you get a lot more family conflict. Coming together as a family isn't always a good thing.
No, it's not.
So there's a lot usually happening in the mental health field during this time of year. The days are shorter, there's not as much sunlight. I mean, there's a whole litany of reasons why it's harder this time of year. And now we're doing it in the middle of a pandemic. And I think we need to be having as much conversation like we are even in this podcast about challenging complacency, remembering mental health is an issue, remembering that this stuff is going to be a challenge, and just talking about it.
Yeah, that's a lot of heavy stuff that you're dealing with on a regular basis. We're all dealing with right now. And so my question is, what are some of the hardest parts of your job? And in the midst of a really challenging job, what keeps you going?
Yeah.
Why do you stay?
Well, I love my job. I'll start with that part, but I'll get into that in a second. The hardest part about my job, hands down, is what in the field we call vicarious traumatization. Okay, so you guys know what trauma is. Big trauma, little trauma. We all know about trauma. There is a legitimate term, vicarious trauma, in our field because we do hear a lot of dark things. We have a lot of dark conversation. Sometimes I even worry as I'm sitting here having these conversations that I can come across kind of callous because I've had to have these conversations so many times. And I talk about a lot of dark things. So I'm very mindful of that. But I learned about vicarious trauma very early as a baby therapist in my career because I experienced it. I remember having, to be honest, my job now, I have amazing clients. I have amazing people that I work with. I've had a very fortunate career over the last probably 10 years. And compared to what I've worked with in the past, I'm feeling pretty good about my job now. It works for me. I've worked with some heavy hitting situations in the past, and I remember being a baby therapist thinking to myself, this only happens in the movies. This doesn't happen in real life. And I remember telling a supervisor that this doesn't happen in real life. She's like, yeah, this is happening. Like, this is your job now, is to help clean this up, like help fix this. So I learned about it very early on. And I also learned to do a lot of rituals, a lot of, again, self-care, all different kinds of means of self-care. I literally debrief myself every day when I leave work. It takes me a while before I go pick up my kids. I try to, it sounds silly, but I disrobe as soon as I get home. I take off my work clothes. I literally have music that I listen to as soon as I get in the car after I leave my office. Just little tiny things all day long to really separate work from my personal life. It's hard, but I do it. The other thing is when it comes to my self-care, I'm very protective of my positivity. So again, I'm a pretty neutral person, but I also know that it doesn't take much negative influence from the world to tip me over, right? Kind of put me in a funk because I have to hear so much of it at work every day. So I watch a lot of Disney movies, right? I giggle and laugh as much as I possibly can. Opportunities like this to spend time with people that I admire and I get re-energized and re-enthused from, I do it because I need that. It's my self-care. And I know that there's good in the world. I don't ever want to lose my belief in the good in humans in the world because it gets dark.
Yeah.
So, but with that said, I love my job. I work with humans. Some of them are very flawed. Some of them are very broken. Some of them are very damaged. But I feel incredibly gifted to be able to do my job and have learned early on in my career how to contain it so that I can do my job and not get burnt out, which is a thing in my field.
Yeah, it seems like it would be. I mean, just like any sort of field, like where you're just helping people or emptying yourself essentially for other people to heal, or that can be exhausting.
Yeah.
So self-care is really just kind of a way of like protecting yourself, right? Like it's a way of nurturing and creating boundaries. But it makes me curious, do you go to therapy yourself? Is that part of your self-care routine? And is it difficult to care for your own mental health while you're actually caring for others' mental health as well? Like, what's that balance look like?
Yes, I definitely go to therapy. Off and on. I don't consistently do it. I kind of, similar to how I would tell my clients, you go when you need it. And the benefit of really getting to know a therapist and building a relationship with them is they know you and they know your story, kind of like the family doctor. So even if you don't need to consistently go to them all the time, you still go. I'm going to put a real quick plug in right there. Therapy isn't just for when we're struggling, okay? Because sometimes, again, go back to the toddler in a tantrum. When we're in the middle of crisis, we might not get the true benefits of therapy because we're not able to take in all the information as we can when life is peaceful and life is calm. So even when my life's great, I still go to therapy. I check in with my therapist and make sure that, I'm taking care of myself and getting new information, new insights. Also, I like in graduate school to really expensive personal therapy, right? With all due respect to all the grad schools out there that are training us therapists. It was in grad school, I learned what I needed to know to do my job and make the state of California happy. But I learned my stuff. And they really push us in grad school to do our own therapy, to get accustomed to that experience. Partly because we expect our clients to be vulnerable. Why wouldn't we be? But also because it is an integral part. Having our own safe space, just like we offer our clients, is vital to it. We're human too. My life can be a hot mess on a regular basis, just like any of my people. And I have to be taking care of myself, and that includes my self-care, that includes my own therapy, in order for me to be able to contain that and walk into my office and be there for my clients.
That's really good. I'm curious to hear as well. You kind of described a little bit of an ebb and flow. So what are some things you're just aware of as the ebbs and flows of life come, and as you're aware of like, oh, it's a little bit of a harder time, I know I need a little more support, or even though this is a good time, I still want to collect insights, and how do you gauge that for yourself?
I don't know that I really, and this will probably be one of my growing edges, I think, something I'm still working on as a human. I don't know that I'm great at gauging it. It's really, I wing it. I wing a lot in this life. I know anxiety all too well. I don't know if you ladies know anxiety, but it's a friend of mine. We live together quite often. And I've learned to let go and be accepting of a lot. And part of that was learning to let go of control. But finding that balance between control and winging it is a work in progress for me still. So right now I'm kind of erring on the side of I check in with myself sporadically. There's really no consistency to it. What do I need right now? What do I got going on? Again, this year, 2020, I don't know what happens tomorrow. So I'm checking in with myself a lot more frequently. I'm utilizing my own therapy a lot more frequently. I'm prioritizing my self-care. I'm practicing what I preach. There's really no rhyme or reason to it. The ebb and flow, I think, is just, it's organic, it's natural. I check in when I need to. But again, just like every other human out there, I could probably use a little bit more of that, but we're all surviving right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that it's cool to hear you talk about how like you yourself are go into therapy and like you're aware of the value of that. It actually makes you think of a guest we recently had on, Sarah Parker, who's a wax specialist, and how like her initiation into being a waxer was to get herself waxed with like a bunch of other women in the room who are also wax specialists, like watching you fully naked, bearing all of yourself to be waxed, and like you're in this physically vulnerable position, and you're doing a similar thing and putting yourself into this like mentally vulnerable position. You yourself going into therapy and sort of practicing what you preach, and also getting that perspective of your clients. So I think that's really awesome. But I feel like there's a question we have to ask because this is a woman-focused podcast, which is I'm really curious to hear about any sort of differences that you see between like men and women coming into therapy, the types of issues that come up between men and women, or even the way that you're treated as a therapist with your clients who are male or female. What is that dynamic?
There's definitely big differences, I think, culturally. I'm really going to speak, as I kind of answer this, I'm going to jump in with my bias. I am from this community. I'm from a small town, small communities. And culturally, I think there's a difference between men and women's emotional processing in general, but I really think it's prominent in our culture, especially locally. I call this, for better or worse, the good old boys club up here. I grew up here. I love it, but it can be sort of stigmatizing in how men are allowed to process their emotions, how women are even allowed to process or demonstrate their emotions. So with that said, there's a difference. I don't know the exact statistics, but I probably have close to as many male clients in my private practice as I do females. But it can be a little more of a challenge to get them to open up from the get-go, right? Yeah. A lot of them come in as first-timers. I've never done therapy before. They sit down on the couch. I know, cliche therapist thing to say. They come to my couch, but like they sit down, and it takes a little while longer to get them comfortable. But with that said, male or female, another, again, the letters after my name, I like to make a joke. There's something about my environment, the letters after my name, something about the context of coming into therapy. People pretty quickly, maybe some of it's how I approach it, I don't know, but people pretty quickly come in and just sort of know that they're in that safe space, male or female, to sit down and kind of let their guards down and be vulnerable. Doesn't take long usually before the emotions show up. Usually looks like tears, right? And nobody up here likes tears, right? Everybody's, but my job is to jump in and make them comfortable. We're here to show emotion. How I get treated as a clinician, I think, there's a lot of amazing female colleagues that I have out there. So I wouldn't say there's a huge, I'll get to that. I got some thoughts on that, but I'm going to shelf that for a second. There's some difference, from a male client versus a female client. There are definitely differences in the field. But honestly, I think age, being a younger female therapist, I have older female colleagues who are highly respected. I've experienced probably more ageism than necessarily questioning because of my gender or the fact that I'm female. But in terms of male versus female clients, there can be a difference. I am cognizant we are very, very heavily trained in grad school to be aware of the power dynamics, transference, countertransference. Those are the fancy words for basically how your client feels about you versus how you feel about your client. We're very, very trained to be aware of those things in grad school because they are always happening, right?
So then, like, how do you, I know you mentioned, like, that the fact that people, okay, focus in. So people are coming in to receive therapy, you know, like people are already in a spot where they're like aware that they need this probably, or where so many other people in their life have been like, you need this, that they're finally doing it or something, I imagine. So like, I would love to hear a little more of like how you, ways that you sort of break down some of that like reluctance to be in therapy, or some of that sort of like wall that people have up, especially with like men feeling like they can't necessarily show those emotions, or women feeling like they're going to seem hysterical if they show emotions, or things like that. Like, do you see like women who are apologetic for their emotions? I feel like that's something that I see a lot in women that I know, and in myself. So like, what does that breakdown look like?
The best way I can think to kind of answer that is to just tell you sort of like you come into my office, this is sort of going to be an experience for you. Regardless, again, this is just kind of across the board, how I operate, I guess, as a therapist. For one thing, the tears, right? And hysterical, like you use the word hysterical. Tears are a natural human emotion and we need them. They need to come out. So I don't know if that's the right word, it seems extreme, but I shock a lot of my clients because I hide my tissues, right? So you come into my office and you sit down, and again, it doesn't take long unless you're really stoic or you're really convinced you don't need to be there, which some people are, and some people it takes a little coaxing, right? A little getting their comfort zone. There's going to be some tears. You're going to start talking. You know you're in a safe space. You're going to let down a little bit. They start looking for the tissues every time, right? But I hide my tissues because what are tissues synonymous with in our culture? Cleaning it up, right? Oh, here. Oh, I see you're upset. Let me hand you, here, you know. And now, is it ill-intended? No, right? We're looking out for each other. But we have a natural inclination to either reach for the tissue or hand someone else a tissue to clean it up.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, we'll fix it. Like, let's...
Yeah. And honestly, I think that's part of the problem. Those need to come out, right? I don't care how messy it gets or how much snot, which again, I get they care, right? So I do keep tissues in my office, to be fair, because I do understand they're necessary. But I don't leave them right there at the forefront because I want people. And it's little things like that. I know it's a silly example, but it's little things like that that I try to make my entire environment like, no, you're going to, like, this, it's expected. It's not hysterics. It's not unreasonable. People do apologize, especially women, like you said. But from the get-go, I try to create kind of an environment of normalizing. Like, no, this is an emotional space. That's exactly what this space is for. The reality is, again, when else in your daily life can you just break down, right? We're not really safe to do so. So I want this space to be that. Another quick thought, just kind of on how I approach that in general, is I'm a very humanistic therapist. Like, you're not going to come in and see me, you know, sit very formally and with my little clipboard in hand and like start taking, and I have colleagues, bless their hearts, are amazing people, but they do that, right? They're very formal and they're very professional, very old school Freudian, like, you're not going to know anything about me, I'm the professional here. Yeah. That is not how I operate. Like, I'm a human. I have emotions. I understand emotions. I also just so happen to be trained to help you contain your emotions. I believe in the old school helper and healer. I believe in the old school medicine man. I by no means am a medicine man, but basically, you know, especially with my men, sometimes this helps. I bring them in, I talk to them about, hey, you know, you're basically sitting down in my fancy teepee. Granted, it's real fancy, right? And I got a real comfy couch, but it's essentially a teepee. You know, you get to come sit down here, and that's what the old school helper and healer was doing ages ago, right? I love like the Native American culture and some of how they deal with and approach mental health. And just that idea that you could sit down with someone, and it's not that they were a magician, they didn't have any magical powers, but they had insight gained from talking to so many different people and so many different life experiences, and that's what they could share, and that's what us therapists have to offer. We don't have magic wands, but we have insight and containers, and we've helped so many people through different situations that we have learned a few things along the way that we can pass on to our clients. That's what I do. And that's how I tell men sometimes, hey, this isn't like therapy, right? Like, because that's got a stigma attached to it. This is just you and me sitting down in my fancy teepee. You get to choose what you're going to talk about, right? And again, I'm very informal in how I do things, but that's what I've learned works for me, because that's how I get people to feel comfortable and open up.
Yeah. I think it's amazing because you are taking something that I think a lot of people feel a lot of shame attached to therapy. A lot of people feel like they must be on the brink of like mental absolute breakdown in order to go to therapy. And you're taking this thing that has unfortunately received a lot of cultural stigmatization, a lot of thoughts like, oh, if you go to therapy, you must be crazy. Like you must, I even saw, if you guys have recently watched the movie Freaky Friday, the version with Lindsay Lohan and Jamie Lee Curtis in it, because there's like 3 different versions of this movie. In that movie, they have a ton of caricatures and stereotypes of people who go to therapy because the mother is a therapist. And it was like, oh, this is not good. Like, great movie, really funny. But that part was like, oh, this was obviously made a while ago when this was considered fine to do. But I think that you being able to sort of break down those walls and say like, okay, don't even think of this as therapy. I'm here. I'm in some ways like a friend. I'm what's the word? Like I'm on your same level, you know? And then also like, I love the act of not having tissues available for people because
I feel like such a rebel therapist.
Yeah. You are. I'm just thinking about the snot coming down my face and like I'm like,
yeah. But I think that a physical act like that can translate into the way that you think about it. Like you don't even realize that using a tissue is just what you do when you're crying or when you have snot running down your face. Like that's just the thing that everybody does. But like questioning like, oh, is this right to do in this moment? Is this me actually trying to clean this up as quickly as possible so that I'm not actually facing and embracing the emotions that I'm feeling right now, you know? And so I think that physical act can have such a powerful impact on the way you're thinking about it. Yeah. So I love that.
Even jumping off of like the part you were saying about tissues, I'm like having a flashback of like when I was in ministry school, way back when in another life. I attended 3 years of ministry school, and we had like little groups that we were broken up into that was like your family for the year, and you did life together. And I remember, and then you have a pastor over that group. And I remember this one experience one day, we called it like something really dumb and Christian-easy, and it was like Freedom Day. And you'd get up and you'd talk about what you're leaving behind essentially, and then you'd run through this like tarp that velcroed in the middle and you break through it, and it was very cheesy, but you know, also it served some freedom for me. But I remember like I had never cried. I'm not a cryy person. I cry a couple times a year maybe. And I had never cried like that in front of a group of people that I didn't know well. And I remember how much freedom and safety that actually did bring, of like, oh, no one's actually trying to fix me right now, and I actually don't need to be fixed. And that was what ushered that in. And I maybe at some level we continuously offer people tissues because actually we're uncomfortable with their emotions and their vulnerability. Ding, ding, ding. And I'm like, what would it look like if we were all just comfortable with our very human, very normal everyday emotions and showcasing them?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like the difference between like having a bad day and like going home to your mom and like crying onto her shirt and like snot and but like there's no shame or concern or like, oh, my mom's gonna judge me or like this is uncomfortable. It's just like a full
cathartic experience.
Yeah, it's like crying with abandon versus like when you get out in the real world and it's not your mom, and so you're when you cry there's sort of like a self-consciousness and shame that comes along with that but you know, all of us need a good mom cry every once in a while.
Well, and it's the safety, right? That is what therapy. Honestly, I'm reluctant even as those words come out of my mouth because it is therapy, right? Yes, I'm a licensed marriage family therapist, but it's an experience. I wish I could find a better. It's not life coaching. It's not, but it is therapy. I just wish there wasn't so much stigma attached to it. But that safety that you feel like when you describe that, Kelly, about going back to mom and having that moment, that is what therapy offers, is the safety, right? I'm not mom. I don't want anybody snot on my t-shirt, but like that experience of like coming in and feeling safe enough to let your guard down. Again, men versus women, it kind of wraps all these questions, that is what therapy offers. That is the value of it, is being able to just have that contained, and have a safe space where you can go and feel like, okay, this is why I think it's so valuable to have long-term relationships. Kelly, you were talking about, 3 years working with your therapist. Like having those long, valuable relationships is huge in this field.
So you had mentioned that there's a lot of sexual relationship training that you have to go through as a therapist before you get licensed. And it seems like with all these things you're talking about, with, letting your guard down and being in such an intimate space with somebody and all of those things, it seems like those kind of emotions can come up. Why is that training important, and how does it help like mitigate sort of all those dynamics?
Good questions. This is a big deal in my field. Again, I'm going to like blend a few different questions you guys have asked together with that. It goes to the male versus female. It goes to some of that as well. The idea, so we literally, I'm just going to say this because it's a thing. When we're in graduate school, we are trained very, very heavily on this. I mentioned transference and countertransference, right? Transference is when your client is putting stuff on you, like they're projecting things onto you. Sometimes that can be like a romantic feel. Sometimes that can be, you remind me so much of my mom, right? Which might be a good thing, might not be a good thing in therapy. Countertransference is how we as the clinician feel about our client. Same thing, right? I can have a natural affinity, or like, oh my gosh, I would love to be friends with this person in my personal life, right? But I have to have those professional boundaries. Or I can be like, dude, you remind me of my brother. Like, no, right? So and that's, we're human too. So we have that countertransference and transference happening all the time in therapy with every single person we encounter. A lot of times, especially because of the vulnerability, just like you were saying, the emotional processing we have very few people in our lives we genuinely let our guards down like that too, right? Usually it is things like our very close family members, our moms, our partners, right? So especially if there's, there can always be an attraction happening or a romantic thing. And to be honest, it can happen on both sides. Again, even us clinicians are human. We are the professionals in the room though. Right? So we are the ones that are trained very heavily, again, in grad school, to be mindful of those boundaries and those countertransferences and what's going on. We literally have a pamphlet on hand, 24/7, all the time, says, it is titled, it's like a blue pamphlet, and it says in bold letters, professional therapy does not include sex. Ask any therapist in the state of California, they know what I'm talking about, because we have it on hand. It is a state of California thing. So because it is such a pertinent issue. How many times have you guys, Freaky Friday, I can't recall, but I don't think this was in that movie, but how many times in pop culture, watching movies, watching TV, do you see a relationship start to transpire between a therapist, a psychologist, and their client?
Yeah.
Right? It is stigmatized all the time. I wish I could say that it's just a joke, right? But it's not just a joke, it's real. Yeah. So that's why it is such a thing. And I hope that kind of explains where I think it comes from. I do understand where it comes from, the vulnerability and the emotions in the room, but it's because there's an inherent power dynamic, and basically I know everything about you. You know absolutely nothing about me. And yet there's now these weird potential romantic feels going. It's completely inappropriate because it's just not fair. Not fair to the client, not fair to the clinician, which is why it is so important that we hold those boundaries really firmly in place, and that we have that little pamphlet ready to go. So if it gets weird and anything comes up in conversation, we can be like, and this is why. We don't even have to explain it, right? Yeah. We don't have to sit and have an awkward conversation. I mean, we should appropriately, because we're supposed to be good at communication. But like, we can say like, hey, like, I understand this is happening and it's real for both of us, but this is the reminder of what the context of our relationship is.
Yeah. And I imagine, like, you know, someone's coming in to receive therapy and they feel like they've bore so much of themselves to this person, and they've had no repercussions for that. You know, like they've had this person totally like absorb everything that they've said. So you feel like you have this like relationship with them. I can see that especially with like I see on the male side of like a man feeling like, okay, this is the only place where I feel safe enough to show my emotions. And so this brings me so much attachment to this person. And then on the female side, seeing like, okay, I'm coming to this person and I'm not being judged or called crazy or called over dramatic or all of these different things that women are oftentimes called for being emotional. And so I feel this connection with this person and I want this intimacy with them, you know? So it's super interesting. Yeah. But to kind of pivot a little bit, Kellyanne mentioned that she goes to therapy. She loves it, has gained a lot from it, is like the biggest advocate for therapy that I know. But Kelly and I have never gone to therapy. We've
Never.
Yeah, we've never done it. I've like briefly considered it, but really just in passing. Never seriously thought about going to therapy. And so I guess I want to ask you, like, kind of what's the point? What's the point in going to therapy? And like, do you think everyone should go, even if you don't feel like you need to, you know? I know you touched on some, you going to therapy during times where you feel good and times where you're not feeling great. So I think I have a hunch towards where you're leaning with that, but I want to hear about it.
That is a doozy. It's a good question. A few things come to mind. I'm going to try and organize my thoughts because it's a big one. And I got a few different places. Like I have the logical, well, this is where therapy would benefit you, right? But then I also have what I'm going to pick on you girls a little bit for. You guys are advocates. You're doing this podcast because you're challenging stigma and because you're challenging you're advocating for women, you're advocating for humans in general, right? You're wanting to educate people out there, you're wanting to hear new voices, you're wanting to gain insight, right?
Yeah.
I mean, am I hitting
All those things are
some
correct.
nails on the head there?
That's true.
So why? So again, if we wait for people to need therapy, right? If we wait for people to feel like, okay, I'm broken, something's wrong, I'm not communicating with my partner. If we wait for all those typical things to happen, or you said earlier, everyone in the family is like, you should go to therapy, right? If we wait for that to always be the case, we're only furthering the stigma of therapy, right? Yeah. For two healthy, successful, normal, for each of you in your own individual spirits and your strengths and your attributes and what you have, to voluntarily go, how cool is it? Like, I love sitting in this group and talking with my friends. I love having existential meaning of life, big conversations, philosophical conversations. For you to enjoy that and rob yourselves of the opportunity to do it with, again, that old school helper and healer that has those conversations not just within the circles of their friendships, but with people from every different walk of life and every different demographic. That in and of itself, you guys showing up to therapy challenges the stigma, right? And knowing that you guys are big proponents of that and advocates for kind of pushing back on some of those envelopes, I highly encourage you to think about it. Why not have the experience?
It is true. Like, why not?
Yeah.
On the other hand, though, I do feel like, and I'm not saying I've never considered therapy because I have, and it's just kind of been like, I don't know, so it's probably mostly laziness that has kept me from like making any decisions either way. But there are also people who, live relatively healthy lives and have good friendships who they can like process things with through, and good marriages, or people like safe places where they can go. So like, what does therapy offer? Something that like a healthy ecosystem of life doesn't?
And that's a hard one. So here's the reality. So that's where, again, I'm going to come in with my challenge, right? Of like, go. Because that's what we need to challenge. We need this to be a normalized counseling. Again, it's a TP, you guys. Therapy's a heavy word, right? I'm gonna have to like come up with some catchy like thing for therapy. But it's a check-in process. It's a challenging complacency. But what is my ultimate goal when I'm meeting with someone for the first time? Before I even know much of their story and what they've got going on, I'm already looking at the context of their life situation. I'm already looking at where do we need to build strengths for you to have positive, healthy social support, a positive, healthy life. Because again, kind of like the family doctor, I mentioned that earlier, I don't foresee us being able to. The reality is I can't see clients every day, every week for the foreseeable future, right? Eventually my life situation changes. It has over the last couple of years, just being in this area. I've taken different positions in different jobs. I've had clients that moved away or I moved away from them. So it's not, the idea is to build that healthy system if it's not already in place. Can it offer something? Always. I truly believe that. Good conversation, even in a professional capacity with someone that can help support your goals and your visions, that's not going to detriment you in any way, shape, or form, right?
Yeah.
With that said, kind of a tangent, but on that same note, I'm very dialectical. I should have warned you all in the beginning. I will find myself on one end of the spectrum, and then very quickly I'll seemingly kind of contradict myself, but it's because I do believe in both. I believe on this side of the street, but I also believe that there's some truth to this side of the street as well, if that makes sense, on both sides of that spectrum.
Yeah.
I love my job. I do. You were talking about the dark parts of my job earlier, Kelly. There can be very dark days. And back when I was working in the field, I was much more involved in the field of addiction, working in rehabs. I was working with a lot of people with heavy duty trauma, coming out of incarceration, combat veterans. Like I've worked with some heavy populations. And there have been many points over my career where I have wished there was no need for my job. Like I really wish I didn't have to have a job. I really wish I didn't have to do this. Be an interventionist, show up to the emergency room in the middle of the night for someone that's overdosed, or I wish that all the time. Because I know that that's not going to happen anytime soon. We're a little bit of a complicated creature living in a complicated world. That it is what it is. But in theory, I wish during maybe like early adolescence, we put more emphasis on how to emotionally process, how to use those social supports. I wish more we could promote a better, all the things you just mentioned, a well-rounded, healthy social life and system around us to where there's not as much need for my job, right? So at the same time that I feel like my job will benefit anybody at any given time, because why not? Why not have awesome conversation with people you trust? I'm not gonna lie, it'd be really cool to live in a world where there was a lot more healthy emotional processing and there wasn't as much need for people to come into therapy in crisis.
Totally. I think for me, I always struggle with, I'm a 3 on the Enneagram. And so for anyone that knows what it means, I'm always like inputting the shoulds in life and like trying to sort through them, And so like all the things you need to do to be a well-rounded person is like you gotta tidy up and keep your house clean in Mario Kondo. You gotta exercise. You have to eat well. You have to get a massage every once in a while. You gotta like go to the chiropractor and get your essential oils on and go to therapy and get 8 hours of sleep every night and have social life, but also have alone time and read a lot and also
extensive list.
Take some time to watch a good show every once in a while, but don't watch too much TV. So like I think everyone has can feel like okay, I have to schedule one, I have to have a date night with my husband once a week in order to keep my marriage healthy, and I have to there's all these like things that I feel pressure to do all the time that I'm like kind of sorting through.
Right.
And so when I look at therapy as one of those things, it's hard for me not to be like, okay, it's just one of the 1,000 things that I ought to do in order to be like a successful human being, and I can't do all of the things, but I also feel like, I've had traumatic experiences in my life, and I don't know, have I processed them? Like have I really like given myself the time to like go into it and figure out what that really was and what really happened and like how that's affected me? I don't know. So
yeah, I feel like I think that the idea of having that time that is just for you to spend talking about yourself, essentially, I can see how that could be really valuable, because like I think about my friends that I have, and we have deep conversations and we talk about those existential things, but it's not a time that is like me focused, which sounds like a little weird and like selfish for me to say, but like, you know, obviously it's not, because you're in dialogue with this person. But in therapy, I imagine you have that space to be much more introspective, and to not just talk about these big issues, but to really think and process about how they affect you. And I even think about things that, like, I feel like I'm a well-functioning human, like 99% of the time. But there's certain things where I have like triggers and things where I'm like, oh, maybe I need to actually process these things with somebody, you know? And I think about you mentioning like, if it was normalized for you to start going to therapy at a young age, if I had the tools of like emotional intelligence as a middle schooler, my entire like teenage years would have been so different. Understanding how to actually process emotions instead of like emotions kind of just like happening to you and bombarding you like an avalanche, like that's sort of what teenagedom felt like to me. Being able to recognize, like, taking a step back and looking at things with perspective, because especially when you're young like that, it feels like everything is the end of the world. I can see how that would be so helpful to young people to have a check-in with a therapist, just like they have a check-in with their pediatrician, you know? And another thing that I was thinking about as you're talking about this is one thing I keep going back to is you talk about like how beneficial it can be to have therapy. There's so many people that don't have access to therapy, whether financially they can't afford to do it, or they don't live somewhere where there's many therapists if they live in a very rural area. And so but there's also solutions to that, like e-therapy, I guess would be the way to call it, and apps where you can connect with a therapist. What do you think about those types of resources? Obviously, there's probably been a spike in those since COVID and quarantine and everything.
Yeah.
But.
Well, this is a, well, for one thing, before I move on to that question, can I just give you both credit for basically selling me on why you both as newbies, right, Kellyanne? Would you agree to that? Because I'm pretty sure they both gave me a really good rundown of why therapy would benefit.
I think so.
So just saying, you guys sold me. So thank you.
It may have happened.
The tables turned.
It reminded me, oh yeah, just keep going because of all these reasons. Like, you need this.
Right. It sounded amazing. So thank you for your guys' insights. But, well, okay. So here is a vulnerable moment for me, I suppose. Since graduate school, have been, I wouldn't say like against doing online therapy and e-therapies and things like that. It wasn't for me. Like, I am a humanistic. I gotta sit in front of my people. I gotta read them. They gotta read me. Again, how am I gonna do my job and get their comfort level if they can't see me and see my body language and feel? I'm such a feeler. Like, I'm intuitive. I'm an empath. I feel. That's how I do my job. How am I gonna feel what they need? So I've been reluctant. I have drug my feet in this modern world, and I'm a modern person. I'm all about technology, but as a therapist, I couldn't do it. Now I have no choice, right? So again, thank you 2020 and the pandemic and COVID. I have no choice. All of my therapies are done. Not entirely true. I have a day job where I'm in a medical clinic, but my private practice is all done via Zoom now, via online resources. I've had to get with the times. So with that said, I'm coming around to it. And I do think in terms of access, like you were saying, I think that's the most valuable piece. Is honestly, to my knowledge, most clinicians are doing things online these days. I see that being the future. I see it. I'm reluctant to say that because I still miss my TP and my people, but I see it being the future, and I think anything is better than nothing. Again, I've heard stories. You're not going to find, if you randomly go on the internet and look for a therapist, you're not always going to find like the therapist for you. So in e-therapy, you're not the same thing. You're not going to find like the best communicating therapist or someone that meets your needs online. But they're out there, and I think it's a little bit of a dating process, like a courting process. Like, you get to know them, you feel it out. But in terms of accessibility and the fact that people are going to get something they're going to have an opportunity in a safe space somewhere, I think that's valuable. Why not take advantage of those resources? So, and I'll share a couple that I'm familiar with at the end.
Great.
I was curious, Kelly, just circling back a little bit, if you had any thoughts regarding people. Should they go to therapy? Shouldn't they go to therapy? Having just experienced it, how has it benefited you, and like what?
I mean, well, my mental health journey has been a juicy one. It's been great. But I personally realized I needed therapy when my life kind of started falling apart. And I was like, okay, I'm barely sleeping. I clearly have an anxiety disorder of some kind. Like, we're talking barely functioning. Like, I'd walk into work and people would be like, are you okay? Like, and I'd be like, yeah, what's going on? Like, why would you think I'm not great? So for me, I can say therapy has changed my life. I know a lot of people that I'm like, oh, I think you would benefit from therapy. Especially, you know, Ashley put it really well. Like, this person is an expert, not just in their field, but also from all of their well-rounded, beautiful conversations. They're bringing wisdom to the table. I think you kind of know, like, if you are someone who is in tune with yourself, you're aware of what's going on inside, being able to take temperature of like how you're reacting to things, if you are managing well, like, you kind of know. And I knew for a long time. I mean, even as a teenager, I actually, this will break some people's hearts, but I actually went home one summer for school. Gosh, I think I was 19. And I actually was talking to my parents in the kitchen. And I was like, I actually think something's wrong. And I actually think I really need some help. I think I need to see someone professionally. And my parents, here's the thing, they absolutely do and did the best they knew how. And actually now they both are in therapy, which is like full circle, right? And but their response in the moment was like, no, you don't want to do that. That can go really wrong, actually, because I actually have a family history on one of my parents' side of some serious mental illnesses. And so we have seen what can happen. But for me, it's been really redemptive. I feel like I have someone in my corner who's neutral and there to help me and give me the tools that I need. So that is my take on therapy. I do think everyone can benefit. I don't think it's necessary for everyone. But I personally will probably continue to go to therapy for the rest of my life because of what it's done for me. So those are my thoughts. And I now do not have crippling anxiety, and I can live a pretty normal life, which I'm so grateful for. And my husband, my friends, my family, they've all been a huge support to me as well. Not just my therapist, but my therapist has been a critical role in that. So that's why I've been so excited for this episode to talk to a therapist and get to take a little bit of a seat back while you two get to kind of ask more heavy-hitting questions. But as we kind of wrap up and come to a close, Ashley, I would really love to hear from you. What does woman being mean to you? What is your interpretation of that phrase?
I've thought about this with you guys asking me to join. And I'm hoping I can kind of articulate the way it is in my heart. Because it's a very bold statement, I feel like. And I think what you guys are doing on here is bold. Woman being to me is about becoming. It's a journey. It's a process. And I think when I say becoming, what I'm really looking at is sort of an acceptance of our strengths as women, as well as our growing edges. This speaks to that neutrality that we spoke about earlier. We need each other. We all have things that we bring to the table. The scholar needs the career woman for hope. The mother needs the child as much as the child or the daughter needs the mother. We have strengths, but we also have growing edges that I'm not going to call them our limitations, but I think we all have things that we need to support each other in. And I think the key is learning to be accepting of where we're at, which is that becoming process, so that we can come together. I can have my strengths, but I can look to the women around me as being empowered within themselves to bring their strengths to help offset me, if that makes sense. To me, it's a becoming process. It's an accepting process. I don't think it's something that I was toying with this word being, woman being. That's why I use the word. That's why I followed it with becoming, because I think we're getting there. I think we're all on this journey. I look at, again, the benefit of my job is I talk to people, I talk to women. I have an amazing client that I'm working with right now who is in the early stages of retirement. And this is a career woman. Like, I hold her on such an esteem. Like, and I tell her this, I've worked with her for years, and I'm like, what you have done for your community, what you have done as a professional, right? She's an amazing woman. I aspire on a career level to be as impactful as her, but she is still becoming, right? She embodies so much of her strength, and yet she's looking at her growing edges, even as she comes into retirement. Like, what do I need as a woman right now? Who do I need to surround myself with? We are powerful people. We are powerful humans, but we need each other. And I see too much of women letting our insecurities of those limitations and our growing edges get the better of us. And I want to see women be more accepting of who we are wholly, which includes those growing edges and our strengths. If that makes sense.
I love that so much. Really that actually reminds me of, I heard someone speak one time who is a counselor, a Christian counselor, and she would talk about how I don't have to get competitive with other women. I don't have to get jealous, because she is holding up a mirror to me of my potential as well.
Absolutely.
And that always stuck with me. And I love that concept of, like, we actually get to be together and growing together, pulling out the potential in each other, but also accepting the spaces that someone else needs to fill.
Absolutely.
I love that. Also, the career woman you mentioned, I'm like, can we have her on the podcast? That's incredible. And honestly, like, I hope for myself that I continue to grow the way you just described, this amazing career woman that is still pushing for her own growth. And I love that. Speaking of growth, do you have any recommended resources for us, for the woman being audience? Like, what do you recommend?
I, off the cuff, just, as a therapist, I wouldn't be doing my due diligence, especially since we talked about some dark things such as suicide, without referencing the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Just a reminder, the number, I had to write it down just to be safe, 1-800-273-8255. It's a heavy year, right? So I'm definitely going to stick a little plug in there for that. That's a big one. Yeah. We talked about the online resources. The two that I'm really familiar with that I think are very valuable, BetterHelp.com, I believe it is, and Talkspace. I've heard good things. I have colleagues. I have not used them myself, but I have colleagues and I have clients that have used both of those. There's a lot of resources out there, though, so I highly recommend, using those resources locally. If you're looking to get established with a therapist, unfortunately, I myself am not taking new clients right now. So it's hard for me to even say that, because I love my job so much and I wish I could just open my doors. But it's been a challenging year. So that's my boundary that I'm putting in place. But if you're looking for local therapists, there's a lot. We are very fortunate in this area. We have 2 universities putting out master's level clinicians and who are working on getting licensed. Don't be afraid to try an intern. Again, this is a humanistic experience. They may still be early in their baby therapy journey, right? But interns are just as valuable. But Psychology Today is a great online resource. Again, it's like dating. I wish I had better guidance, but I haven't even figured out the dating world. So it's like dating to find a new therapist. Try a few on for size. Don't be afraid to go see someone for, one time, feel it out. Okay, this is not my person. Try the next. Insurance will usually cover things like that. You could talk about rates, if insurance is not always an option. There's different options out there. So use those online resources. But again, pretty much everyone's doing everything online these days. So don't be afraid to use things like the BetterHelp and the Talkspace. And I have to plug my favorite book. So it is my thing. If you know me on a personal level, it is my go-to. And this is a heavy one, you guys. So I'm not saying it's recommended reading, but I still have to throw it out there, because anyone that knows me and hears this podcast will be like, you better mention your thing, because everyone, I talk about it on a daily basis, but I'm a huge Eckhart Tolle fan. The Power of Now, heavy read, but it has helped me tremendously with my own anxieties. It's got a lot of spiritual connotation in it, but it's very kind of open-minded. It's one that takes a while to digest, bite-sized pieces, right? But it has transformed my life. My ability to come here and be here with you guys today, again, my anxiety would have had me like I would have had like 5 different lists, like, okay, bullet points. What are we covering, ladies? Like, what do I need to talk about, right? But instead, it was really important for me to come here and be here with you now and just do this. Like, I don't know, you guys kind of gave me a little preparation, but I've never done something like this before. But it was important for me to just be myself, show up with my Starbucks in hand, be here in the present moment. Of course, I'm going to have anxiety from time to time. I got personal stuff out. It's been a week, right? It's been a week for all of us. But I wasn't going to let that week get in the way of the present moment. And that is a huge influence because of, really setting up with my old buddy Eckhart Tolle and the Power of Now. So I guess I will say it's a recommended reading, but when it feels right.
Yes.
I don't have an extensive list of resources and recommended readings, even on my website, even to my clients. I am all about exposure. Expose yourself to new things. Do new things, read new books. I listen to modern day. I listen to Audible all the time. I drive a lot, and I'm always listening in my car. I'm listening to pop culture self-help books, right? Girl Wash Your Face, all those good, the ones that are coming up, the silly ones. Oh gosh, now it's skipping my brain. What is there's one with a curse word in it. I can't think of it now.
I know.
The Subtle
You're a
Art.
Badass?
There's a couple ones. That one I've read, but the Subtle Art of Not Giving.
Oh,
Can
yeah.
I say a curse word?
Oh, we can say it. Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
Yes,
In case you missed
she's
it.
got it. Another one of my personal favorites, right? Again, I'm not going to say it's recommended reading or listening, and they're different, but you pick something up from each of them. And so I'm always an advocate. Go to the self-help aisle, right? Check out the pop culture. I call them pop culture because they're not really going to be like, super clinical, right? But you're going to get something from them. Some of them you're going to be like, I will never read this again and I will never recommend it. But I guarantee even those ones, something will resonate in the back of your mind. I'm just all about exposure.
I loved, I just recently finished Lori Gottlieb's Maybe You Should Talk to
Yes,
Someone.
I just finished it too.
Oh, it was,
I love that.
And it got me so intrigued about therapy as a whole because it's basically the story of a therapist feeling like she had kind of a traumatic experience in her life and she was like, I need to go through therapy. And she talks about, like, she's been through therapy. It's not like a weird thing, but she sort of walks you through what therapy kind of looks like. And so it kind of demystified the experience for me, first of all, and also was just super interesting.
As a clinician, I'm so excited to hear that you've read that. I don't read it, listened to it? Okay, I listened to it. But I love that you have that exposure, Kelly, because I loved it as a clinician because I think she spoke to both populations, clients and potential clients, the humans out there about that therapeutic experience. But then also as a clinician, it was like, I've been there. Like, I totally know about that kind of client. I've had that client too, and it showed her humanity, which is what I'm all about within my own practice.
I love that so much. Honestly, Ashley, it's been such a pleasure and a privilege to have you on. Thank you so much for being here, being able to speak to the mental health space, which is, we all know, so important, and spending some time with us, letting us get to know you, getting to know a little bit about us. It's just been a treat. So,
thank you.
And Women Beings, don't forget, you can always connect with us on Instagram, which is Women Being Podcast, or visit our website at womenbeingcommunity.com. So thanks so much for being here, and we will catch you next time.
Catch you later.
Bye.
Bye.